They told him he had exactly 24 hours left to breathe. He used them to walk willingly into a slaughterhouse. Notice the anomaly in this design. A 13th seat at a table explicitly constructed for 12. That extra chair is the exact reason he never stood a chance. 13 deities stepped into the abyss. Only 12 walked out. You can already see the math of a betrayal forming before a single public tear is shed. Look closely at the tension in this jawline. You are watching a man leverage a fresh corpse to crown himself a savior. They sold the public a masterpiece of a tragedy. A beautiful, desperate narrative of a martyr who laid down his life to buy humanity tomorrow. But history is exclusively authored by the survivors, and what they left bleeding at the bottom of that tower. 2 decades. That's how long the world mourned a messiah who never actually perished. They built monuments, rewrote history, and convinced an entire species that their greatest weapon was safely buried in this tomb. But if you understand how power actually operates, you already know the official story is a meticulously crafted lie. He didn't sacrifice himself for humanity. He was buried alive by the exact people who stood at his funeral and wept for the cameras. 20 years of suffocating in the dark. 20 years to calculate the exact geometry of his revenge. Watch the panic in the creature's eyes as a ghost physically latches onto its skull. It realizes instantly what the 12 false idols on the surface haven't figured out yet. The 13th seat, the anomaly, Legion, the man they needed dead to steal the world, breathing the same air they are. He didn't just survive the abyss, he adapted to it. And the first thing he's going to do isn't save the world. He's going to systematically dismantle the gods who left him down here to rot. The prophet didn't whisper a warning, she delivered a death sentence. There is no ambiguity in her eyes, only the cold reflection of a timeline that has already decided his fate. You're going to die tomorrow. Words that should carry the weight of a mountain are dropped like a casual observation in a cafe. The air in the room thickens, turning oxygen into lead. It's the specific silence of a terminal diagnosis, where the world keeps moving but your clock has just hit 0. Jin looks at the prophet, searching for a crack in the prediction, a single flicker of doubt. He finds nothing but the absolute certainty of a woman who has already seen his corpse. Most people would panic, but Jin is calculating the variables of his own extinction. Notice the way he doesn't flinch. That's the mark of a man who has lived through enough disasters to treat death like an annoying guest. The prophecy isn't just a threat. It's a challenge to the very physics of this world. If the prophet is never wrong, then Jin's survival requires him to become an impossibility. He begins to move, not with the desperation of the doomed, but with the precision of a surgeon. Every step from this moment on is a deliberate strike against the weave of fate itself. Pay attention to the background details here. The world is already shifting to accommodate his absence. You can feel the narrative trying to erase him before the clock even strikes midnight. This is where the surface reality begins to fracture. The calm mask Jin wears is his most dangerous weapon, convincing everyone, including the viewer, that he has a plan he hasn't even conceived yet. A minor detail most people miss. His shadow is lengthening in a direction the light shouldn't allow. The disaster class title isn't just a rank, it's a warning to the universe. He isn't looking for a way to hide. He's looking for the source of the tomorrow she described. You're watching a man hunt his own executioner before the executioner even knows the job is active. Tension isn't coming from the monsters or the magic, but from the crushing inevitability of that 24-hour window. Every second wasted is a brick in his own mausoleum. Notice his hands. They aren't shaking from fear. They're vibrating with the stored kinetic energy of someone who is about to break the rules of the game. If you've been following the prophet's record, you know she has never missed a heartbeat. This is the moment the community has been dreading, the point where the protagonist finally hits a wall he can't climb. The internal shift is subtle but devastating. Jin isn't trying to survive anymore. He's deciding what he's willing to burn down to prove the prophecy wrong. The logic of the world dictates that a prophet's word is law. Jin is about to become an outlaw in the most literal sense of the term. Short breaths, sharp movements. The pacing of the world begins to sync with his heartbeat. A revelation strikes, not a solution, but a deeper understanding of the trap. The death isn't coming from outside, it's been seeded within him from the start. This is the panel that broke the fandom. The expression on his face isn't one of a hero, but of a disaster waiting to happen. Only readers who caught the setup 10 chapters ago realize that the prophet isn't seeing his death. but the death of who he used to be. The pressure builds until the frame can barely contain it. Everything is compressed into this single, agonizing wait for the sun to set. The clock is a character now. Every tick is a psychological blow. He stands at the edge of the threshold. One more step, and he enters the tomorrow that shouldn't exist for him. You're watching a man convince himself of a lie, so he has the strength to make it a truth. The psychological cost is visible in the way he avoids his own reflection. The first sign of the predicted end appears. It's smaller than expected, but its implications are massive. He doesn't retreat. He leans in. The friction between fate and will is starting to create sparks. No words are needed. The visual storytelling here conveys a finality that dialogue would only cheapen. The atmosphere isn't just somber anymore, it's predatory. The world is waiting for him to fail. Everything before this was a distraction. This is the real conflict. This is the moment Jin stops being a victim of fate and starts being its architect. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, signaling the start of the final countdown. His eyes reflect a fire that wasn't there when the prophet first spoke. As the shadows stretch to consume him, he reaches for something hidden in the dark. The prophecy said he would die, but it never said he would stay dead, +3. He survived the end of the world, but not in the way the legends claim. History remembers a martyr, but the truth is far more calculated. The victory against the Crimson Eyes was absolute, and his death was a recorded fact. Yet, every ending is merely a transition for those who know how to manipulate the thread. There is a specific silence that follows a hero's fall. People fill that void with stories of sacrifice, never suspecting the hidden agenda beneath the noble act. He didn't give his life for humanity. He traded it for a second chance. The world mourns a lie, while the architect of that lie begins his real work. Look closely at the way he observes his own funeral. You're watching a man who has successfully detached himself from his own identity to become something else entirely. The environment has shifted, the air feels heavier, and the stakes have quietly reset. He is no longer the hero everyone recognized, which makes him the most dangerous variable in the room. Notice the slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming influx of memories that shouldn't belong to this timeline. He is recalibrating in real time. Most viewers miss the detail in the background here, but the alignment of the stars suggests he hasn't just returned, he's arrived early. The timeline is already fracturing under his weight. He steps into the light, and for a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. It's the kind of tension that exists only when a predator returns to a territory that has forgotten its scent. This is the panel that broke the fandom. The realization isn't just that he's back, but that he's back with the exact knowledge of how everyone around him will eventually betray him. If you've been paying attention to the way the magic circles are forming, you already feel the shift. This isn't the standard revival trope. It's a systematic dismantling of the past. He meets the gaze of a man who will one day be his executioner, and he smiles. That single expression changes the power dynamic of the entire series. The dialogue seems routine, but pay attention to the subtext. He's leading them toward a conclusion they think is their own, a psychological masterstroke played out in a simple conversation. The friction begins to spark. A minor character questions his presence, unaware that they are challenging a god in a child's skin. The irony is suffocating. He needs a weapon, but not the one you're expecting. He's looking for the catalyst of his original downfall, intending to claim it before the cycle can repeat. You're watching a man convince himself of a necessity he once loathed. To save the future, he must become the very villain he died to defeat. The pace quickens. Every movement is a calculated risk, a gamble against the deterministic nature of fate itself. He is running out of time before the first major deviation is noticed. He finds the artifact. The weight of it in his hand is the weight of every life he couldn't save last time. This is the moment where the hero officially dies. Only readers who caught the setup in the prologue understand what just happened. The seal isn't breaking, it's being redirected to a new host. Silence, the impact of his choice ripples through the room. No one speaks, because no one understands the gravity of the sin he just committed for their sake. He turns his back on the light. The path forward is narrow, dark, and entirely solitary, just the way he planned it. The final pieces are moving. An old enemy stirs in the shadows, sensing a disturbance in the flow of destiny. The hunt has begun before the prey is even ready. He looks at his reflection and doesn't recognize the man staring back. It's a haunting reminder that everything he gained came at the cost of who he used to be. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward, the moment where the world realizes the hero didn't come back alone. He understands the fear vibrating in the air. It's a rational response to the unknown, but rationality is a luxury he can no longer afford to provide. Death is a concept he treats with casual disdain. To him, it's not an end, but a failed calculation he has no intention of making. Notice the way he calls him friend. It's not an endearment, it's a boundary, a reminder of the distance between a survivor and a witness. The scale of the coming disaster is already being measured against his past. He isn't just confident, he's bored by the stakes everyone else finds paralyzing. He counts his kills not in numbers, but in the collective failure of those supposed to be saints. He has already surpassed the legends they worship. The question isn't whether he will die, but whether the world can handle what happens if he doesn't. You can see it in his eyes, the hunger for the next calamity. Silence is the real threat here. The environment shifts, reacting to a presence that doesn't belong in this sequence of reality. Look closely at the background details. The structural integrity of the scene is beginning to warp, mirroring the internal instability he's hiding. Every movement is surgical. He isn't just fighting, he is dismantling the very idea of an obstacle, piece by agonizing piece. Pay attention to this panel. You will not see this expression again. It's the one moment where the mask slips and the weight of his kills actually shows. The tension isn't coming from the enemy. It's coming from the realization that he is enjoying the escalation far too much. He moves, they don't, mistake. The gap between thought and execution is where he lives and where his enemies disappear. The detail most people miss is that his hand never actually moved to his weapon. He's winning this through pure psychological suppression. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe, even as he executes the plan with perfect precision. This is the panel that broke the fandom. The shift in perspective reveals that he wasn't looking at the threat, he was looking at the exit. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this means. The cycle isn't breaking, it's narrowing. The atmosphere thickens. It's no longer about survival. It's about the price of victory, and he's clearly willing to overpay. A minor detail from 10 pages ago just detonated. The shadow he ignored, it wasn't a shadow, it was an invitation. He's calculating the trajectory of a fall that hasn't happened yet. He is 3 steps ahead, but the floor is disappearing. Short, sharp breaths. The pacing of the panel layout mirrors a heart rate monitor reaching its limit. He speaks without words. The tilt of his head is a death sentence for someone in the room, but they haven't realized it yet. The light shifts. The calamity isn't a monster, it's a mirror. Everything he hates about himself is standing right in front of him. And just when you think you understand this character, he does that. He abandons the high ground for a gamble that makes no sense. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened. The weapon isn't the sword, it's the history behind it. Impact, not physical, but existential. The truth of the 12 Saints begins to crumble under the weight of his performance. He is a man performing for an audience that isn't there, driven by a ghost he hasn't named yet. The lines are thinner here. The art reflects the fragility of the moment. One wrong move and the narrative collapses into chaos. Notice what he's actually calculating here. It's not the enemy's strength, but the time it will take for the others to arrive and witness his failure. The friction is mounting. The air itself feels heavy, charged with the energy of a man who has forgotten how to lose. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward, the moment where he stops being a hero and starts being a force. His silhouette is the only thing left in the frame. The isolation is complete. He has pushed everyone away to ensure he is the only one left to blame. A reveal that reframes everything. The wound he took wasn't an accident. It was a catalyst for something much worse. The last breath before impact. The panel is almost entirely black. The darkness isn't an effect, it's a character. He smiles. It's the most terrifying thing in the entire chapter. It's the smile of a man who finally found a way to bleed. The door opens, but what stands on the other side doesn't have a name yet. It only has a debt. They are called saints when the public is watching. But strip away the titles, and you're left with nothing but high-end thugs protecting their own interests. The irony isn't just in the name, it's in the calculated indifference they wear like armor. You're looking at men who have turned heroism into a profitable racket. +1. Listen to the sound of those footsteps. That isn't the stride of a savior. It's the measured pace of a predator waiting for the market to peak. There is a secondary rule to this game, one they don't teach in the academy. Efficiency is the enemy of profit. If you resolve a crisis too quickly, you've wasted a perfectly good catastrophe. The math is simple and devastating. More victims equals a higher urgency, and higher urgency equals a bigger payout. That laugh isn't just cruel. It's a confirmation that the system is working exactly as intended. Notice the way he looks at the scene. He isn't checking for survivors. He's calculating the casualty threshold required for the next tier of reward money. The silence here is tactical. Most people see a hero waiting for an opening, but you can see he's actually waiting for the situation to worsen. This is the detail most people miss. The way his hand stays off his weapon even as the screaming intensifies. You're watching a man convince himself that this isn't murder. It's just business management on a grand scale. The tension isn't coming from the monster in the room. It's coming from the man standing by the door, refusing to turn the handle. He knows the exact moment the saint title becomes official, and we haven't reached that body count yet. If you've been paying attention to his eyes, you'll realize he isn't even looking at the threat. He's looking at his watch. This is the panel that broke the fandom's trust in the saint system. The cruelty isn't in what he does, but in everything he chooses not to do. Every second he waits is a deliberate choice to trade a life for a gold coin. Pay attention to this expression. You will not see this level of raw, unfiltered greed masked as duty again. The shift is subtle, but the air in the room has changed. The threshold has been met. Now and only now does he move. Not because the danger increased, but because the profit margin finally justified the effort. Watch how he performs for the onlookers. The transition from cold calculator to saint is seamless and terrifying. Only readers who caught the setup in the first few pages understand that this miraculous timing was actually a timed arrival. The monster is dealt with, but the real threat is still standing in the center of the frame, collecting applause. This is where the mask slips for a fraction of a second. Look at the way he checks the payout notification before checking on the survivors. You might think he's safe now that the incident is over, but he's just realized there was a witness he didn't account for. The problem with being a professional saint is that eventually, someone starts looking into the miracles. He isn't worried about the blood on his hands. He's worried about the discrepancy and the timestamps. Everything before this was just the cost of doing business. This is where the audit begins. He sees the witness, and the calculation starts all over again. The question isn't whether he can save them. The question is whether it's more profitable to let them speak or to let them disappear. He reaches for his blade, but the grip is different this time. He isn't aiming for a monster. The screen flickers, a message arrives, and the look on his face tells you everything his PR team won't. He thought he was the one holding the stopwatch, but someone else has been timing him from the start. He didn't start with a warning. The command to run wasn't a suggestion. It was a realization that the air in the room had already turned lethal. Panic is a predictable chemical reaction, and he's counting on it to mask his first move. Most people see titles as shields, but to him, the word saint is just a target painted in gold. You can see the disgust in the way he frames the question, challenging the very foundation of their perceived moral superiority. He isn't just fighting men, he's deconstructing a myth they've spent lifetimes building. That single click of the tongue is the sound of a predator finding the flaw in the cage. It's a dismissal so absolute that it redefines the power dynamic of the entire room. If you're paying attention to his eyes, you'll realize he stopped seeing them as threats 3 seconds ago. The moment he decides it doesn't matter is the moment their survival becomes a statistical impossibility. He's moving into a headspace where the consequences of his actions are secondary to the purity of the destruction. This is the threshold where a skirmish becomes an execution. The sound isn't just a physical impact. It's the vibration of a reality shifting under the weight of sheer, unfiltered intent. One heavy strike to ground the chaos, forcing everyone to look at exactly what they're up against. Notice the silence that follows. That's the sound of every exit closing at once. The dust hasn't even settled, yet the geometry of the room has been completely rewritten by his presence. He stands at the center of a collapsing hope, watching the saints scramble for a logic that no longer applies. You've seen this kind of desperation before, but never from people who believed they were untouchable. He moves with a clinical precision that suggests he's not just winning a fight, he's performing an autopsy on their fighting styles. Every parry is a lesson they won't live long enough to apply. The detail most people miss is how little energy he's actually wasting. He's letting their own momentum do the heavy lifting. They think they've found an opening, a collective surge of holy energy intended to overwhelm a single soul. But if you've been watching since the first page, you already feel what this means. They're falling for the oldest trap in the book. Overextension is a death sentence when your opponent treats combat like a game of chess. The light they're projecting is supposed to be blinding, but it only highlights the gaps in their formation. He's standing in the one spot where the light can't reach, a void of his own making. And just when you think you understand this character, he drops his guard completely, because he knows they can't hit a target they're too afraid to look at. The internal monologue of a saint is a fragile thing, shattering under the pressure of a man who doesn't care about their gods. He isn't just breaking their bones, he's invalidating their entire worldview with every step forward. The community has been arguing about this specific moment since it dropped. Is he a villain or just the only honest man in the room? He's waiting for the exact moment their conviction turns into pure, unadulterated terror. That's the sweet spot where the body loses its coordination and the spirit loses its will to resist. You're watching a man convince himself he's still in control while his hands are visibly shaking. The escalation isn't linear, it's exponential, and we've just hit the vertical curve. He stops being a person and starts being a force of nature that the architecture itself seems to shrink away from. This is the panel that broke the fandom, showing a level of raw power that reframes everything we thought we knew about the power scale. Silence is his most effective weapon now. Every heartbeat in this room feels like a countdown that he's personally overseeing. He hasn't spoken in pages because there's nothing left to say to people who are already ghosts. The counterattack isn't a strike. It's a revelation of how far behind they truly are. He maneuvers through their ultimate formation like he's walking through a crowded market, bored and searching for something better. The psychological weight of being ignored is doing more damage than the physical blows. Notice how he adjusts his collar, a mundane gesture in the middle of a massacre that signals his total lack of fear. It's a deliberate insult to their efforts, a sign that he hasn't even broken a sweat. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened to the air pressure in this panel. The lead saint is making a choice now, one that will define the rest of this arc and likely end his life. He's reaching for a power that shouldn't be touched, a desperate gamble that screams of a man who has lost everything but his pride. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward. The feedback loop of energy is starting to crack the floor, but he doesn't move an inch. He's watching the spectacle with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching a failed experiment. You can see the realization dawning on his opponent's face. The forbidden power isn't a secret to him, it's a memory. The lines of the art are becoming more jagged, reflecting the mental state of the combatants as the reality of the situation sets in. He's no longer playing the role of the intruder. He's the master of the house, and they are the uninvited guests. Pay attention to this panel. You will not see this expression of genuine disappointment on his face again. He finally speaks, and the weight of his words is enough to halt the kinetic energy of the room. It's not a boast or a threat, but a simple statement of fact that renders their entire struggle moot. The irony of the situation is that they were safer when they were fighting him than they are now that he's stopped. The visual of the crumbling pillars serves as a metaphor for the crumbling hierarchy of the temple. He stands amidst the debris, the only thing in the frame that remains perfectly still and perfectly focused. The tension here is so compressed, it feels like the page might actually tear. He turns his back on them, not out of arrogance, but because they are no longer relevant to the task at hand. There's something much larger approaching from the shadows of the inner sanctum, something even he was waiting for. The real threat was never the men in the room, it was the thing they were guarding. The door at the end of the hall begins to pulse with a light that is the exact opposite of the saint's glow. He smiles for the first time, a sharp, predatory grin that tells you exactly who the real monster is. What happens next is the reason this chapter exists. The perspective shifts, making the viewer feel like they're standing right behind him as he approaches the threshold. You're following a man into a fire he started, and there's no way to turn back now. The detail most people miss. He hasn't drawn his weapon once during this entire encounter. The final barrier isn't made of stone or magic, but of a truth that the world has spent 1,000 years trying to bury. He reaches out his hand, and for a second, the entire universe seems to hold its breath. The question isn't whether he can open it, but what happens to us when he does. 2 decades of silence don't just vanish. They settle into the bones of a city that has forgotten why it was afraid. Time hasn't healed the scars of this landscape. It has only buried them under a veneer of normalcy that is about to shatter. 20 years is long enough for a legend to become a ghost, and for a ghost to become a myth that no one believes in anymore. The clock didn't just stop back then. It started a countdown that only one man knows how to read. The sound of a single footstep shouldn't carry this much weight, yet the rhythm of his stride feels like a heartbeat returning to a dead body. He isn't just walking into a district. He is reclaiming a territory that the current residents think they own. Mark, a name that used to command silence, now barely registers, a linguistic relic of a forgotten era. He hears it and doesn't flinch, because the man who answered to that name died 20 years ago, leaving only this shell behind. Look closely at the way the crowd parts around him, an instinctual reaction to a predator they don't even recognize yet. They think it's just a coincidence, but you can see the cellular level of avoidance from people who have spent their lives fearing the shadows. The architecture has changed, neon replacing the grit, but the rot in the foundation remains exactly where he left it. He isn't looking at the new buildings. He's tracing the invisible lines of the old power structures that still dictate who lives and who disappears. His eyes don't scan the room for threats. They scan for the absence of them, which is far more dangerous in a place like this. Most people miss the way his hand hovers exactly 3 inches from his coat pocket, a habit of a man who expects to be betrayed by the very air he breathes. You're watching a man realize that the world moved on without his permission, and that realization is turning into a cold, quiet rage. It's not the loss of power that stings, it's the lack of memory. They didn't even care enough to keep hating him. He stops at a storefront that wasn't there before, his reflection in the glass looking like a stranger even to himself. The mask of the civilian is slipping, and for a split second, the reflection shows exactly what he's capable of doing to this city. The first encounter isn't an explosion, it's a whisper, a recognition in the eyes of an old man who immediately looks away. That fear is the first honest thing he's seen since he returned, a confirmation that the past isn't as dead as the history books claim. Notice the way he handles the money, with a casual disregard that suggests he remembers when currency was measured in lives, not paper. He's buying information, but the person selling it doesn't realize they're actually signing their own death warrant. The target has been identified, not by name, but by a pattern of behavior that only a veteran of the old wars would recognize. He isn't hunting a man, he's hunting a legacy that was supposed to have been extinguished alongside his own. This is the panel that broke the fandom when it first leaked, because it confirms that the hero hasn't come back to save anyone. He's back to settle a debt that the rest of the world has already written off as an act of God. The transition from the bright street to the dim alleyway isn't just a change in lighting, it's a return to his natural habitat. You can see his posture shift, the weight moving to the balls of his feet as the 20-year gap begins to evaporate. He doesn't need to ask questions when the walls themselves tell the story of who has been running this block in his absence. The graffiti isn't art. It's a map of a new underworld that has grown fat and complacent on his old throne. If you've been paying attention to the background details, you've already noticed the black car that has appeared in every third frame. He noticed it 3 blocks ago, and he's leading them exactly where he wants them to be. A dead end with no witnesses. The confrontation begins with a silence so heavy it feels like a physical presence in the room. They think they have the advantage because they have the numbers, but they're measuring strength in a currency that he no longer uses. He doesn't reach for a weapon, because at this distance, his hands are more than enough to dismantle their entire hierarchy. Pay attention to the way he breathes, slow, rhythmic, completely disconnected from the adrenaline-fueled panic of his opponents. One strike, that's all it takes to realize that the rumors were understated. He isn't just fast, he's efficient in a way that feels almost mechanical. He isn't fighting for honor or survival, he's performing a clinical extraction of a threat. The leader of the group realizes too late that they aren't the hunters in this scenario, they're the bait. You're watching the moment a man understands he is completely and utterly outclassed by a relic from a nightmare. The carnage is localized, precise, and terrifyingly quiet, leaving no room for the grandstanding typical of this district. He stands amidst the wreckage of their ambition, not as a victor, but as a man who is simply clearing his workspace. He picks up a phone from the floor, a piece of technology he barely understands, yet he knows exactly which button will trigger a response. The contact list is a directory of every person who thought they were safe because he was gone. Only readers who caught the setup in the prologue understand what he's looking for in the files he just recovered. It's not money or power. It's a specific date that proves the betrayal was planned before he even went away. He exits the building as the first sirens begin to wail in the distance, a sound that used to mean something to him. Now, it's just background noise, a minor inconvenience in a plan that is already 3 steps ahead of the law. Back in the light, he looks like any other aging man in a crowded city, his coat hiding the blood and the truth. This is the danger of a man who can disappear in plain sight. You never know if the person standing next to you is a victim or a monster. He arrives at a small, unassuming apartment that holds the only person left who remembers the man he used to be. The hesitation at the door is the first sign of weakness we've seen, a reminder that even ghosts have something they're afraid to lose. The door opens, and the look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face is the only confirmation he needs. He doesn't say a word, because "I'm back" doesn't begin to cover the 20 years of wreckage he's brought with him. Everything before this moment was just a prelude. This is where the real story begins to bleed. He hands her a small, rusted key, a symbol of a promise made in a world that no longer exists. As she takes the key, you can see the realization dawn on her that her quiet life has just come to a violent end. He didn't come back to save her. He came back to use her as the final piece of a puzzle he started 20 years ago. He turns away from the light of the doorway, his silhouette merging with the darkness of the hallway outside. He's already thinking about the next name on his list, and the expression on his face suggests that mercy was never an option. He died 20 years ago, and yet they still speak his name like a prayer. It is the first sign of a world that has forgotten how to save itself. Desperation has a specific sound, and here, it is the sound of a city being torn apart while its protectors look for a ghost. This isn't just a monster. It is a reckoning for every failure the world has ignored since the Demon Tower fell. You can see it in their eyes, the realization that their heroes are just men, and men are fragile things when faced with the divine. Look closely at the rebel. It's not just buildings being crushed, it's the entire hierarchy of the modern world. They are waiting for a miracle because they have forgotten how to fight, and miracles are in short supply today. The sky doesn't just darken, it bleeds, a visual confirmation that the laws of nature are being rewritten by something far worse. He enters the frame not as a savior, but as a glitch in the system. The world doesn't recognize him yet. Notice how he stands. Most people would be running, but he is measuring the distance to the throat of a god. This is the moment where the legend stops being a story and starts being a problem for everyone involved. Pay attention to his hands. They aren't shaking, they are vibrating with 20 years of repressed violence. You've seen this pattern before in others, but with him, the arrogance is actually a calculated assessment of his own lethality. He isn't looking at the monster's size. He's looking for the one point where it can feel pain. The crowd is silent because they are witnessing a ghost commit murder in broad daylight. Everything they taught in the academies for 2 decades is being proven wrong in a single, fluid motion. He doesn't use magic like the others. He uses spite, and spite is a much more reliable fuel. If you've been watching the background, you'll see the official. Heroes are more afraid of him than the monster. The impact isn't just physical. It's a psychological break for everyone who thought they knew how this world worked. He's not protecting them. He's clearing the field so he can work without distractions. This is the panel that broke the fandom when it first released, because it redefines what power looks like in this universe. You are watching a man reclaim a throne he never actually asked for, and he's doing it with blood on his boots. The monster realizes it's the prey. The shift in the atmosphere is so heavy you can almost feel it through the screen. Only readers who caught the setup in the prologue understand why his weapon is reacting this way now. He isn't just fighting a beast. He's erasing 20 years of humiliation with every strike. The dust settles, but the air is thinner. He has changed the gravity of the entire situation. Look at the way the sunlight hits the edge of his blade. It's the only clean thing in this entire city. They want to thank him, but the look on his face suggests that gratitude is the last thing they should be feeling. He turns his back on the carnage, not because it's over, but because he's already looking at the next target. He whispers a name that hasn't been spoken since the tower collapsed, and the ground itself seems to recoil. Everything before this was a warm-up. This is where the world realizes the hero didn't come back alone. He looks into the camera, directly at you, as if he knows you've been waiting for this exact moment of chaos. The transmission cuts, but the image of his eyes remains burned into the retinas of everyone watching. A shadow moves in the distance, larger than the last, and he doesn't even bother to draw his sword yet. He didn't look like a man about to die, but that was the first mistake his enemies made. Every movement was a calculation, a silent countdown they couldn't hear until it was already too late to respond. The sound of the first impact wasn't a roar, but a dull thud that signaled the collapse of an entire strategy. You can see it in his eyes. He isn't reacting to the attack, he's anticipating the next three. Surface reality suggests a simple confrontation, but notice the way he shifts his weight before the blade even moves. Most viewers miss the subtle twitch in his left hand. That's where the real trap is being set. They thought they had him cornered, yet the environment itself seems to be bending to his will. This isn't a desperate defense, it's a controlled demolition of their confidence. Pay attention to the distance between them. He's closing the gap not to attack, but to force a specific reaction he's already planned to exploit. The air changes here, a heavy realization settling over his opponents that they aren't the hunters in this scenario. If you've been following his growth, you already know why this specific stance is a death sentence for them. One breath, that's all the time he needs to bridge the gap between a possibility and a certainty. Look at the shadow falling across the floor. He's using the lighting as much as his weapon. He understands that fear is a more effective tool than steel when the odds are stacked against him. This is the moment the fandom has been debating. Did he hesitate, or was that a deliberate opening left for the enemy to take? Only the most observant readers caught the slight smirk that lasted for a fraction of a second. He's letting them think they're winning, feeding them a false sense of security that will be their undoing. The irony is that they're executing his plan perfectly, believing it's their own. The first drop of blood doesn't belong to him. The shift in momentum is invisible to the characters, but you can feel the weight of it shifting toward the inevitable. He moves, they don't mistake. There is a hidden motive in the way he ignores the leader to focus on the weakest link. He's not looking for a quick victory, he's looking for a total psychological collapse of the group. Notice the background details. The way the debris settles suggests he's already mapped out the entire room. You're watching a man who has turned a battlefield into a chessboard where every piece is already in checkmate. The stakes just tripled. What was supposed to be a simple extraction has turned into a test of his core philosophy. A complication emerges in the form of an unseen observer. Friction is the only thing he didn't account for, and now he has to adjust his rhythm mid-strike. Short, sharp movements replace the fluid grace of earlier. The tension is compressing. He's forcing himself to take a hit just to get closer. It's a gamble that only works if he's willing to lose everything to win this one exchange. The weapon in his hand isn't just a tool. It's an extension of a will that refuses to break. You can see the moment his opponent realizes that their strength is irrelevant against someone who doesn't fear pain. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward. He's pulling them into a narrow corridor of choices, and every single one leads to the same outcome. It's a masterclass in narrative inevitability. The internal goal becomes clear. It was never about the fight, it was about the message he's sending to those watching from the shadows. Silence, the impact is felt rather than seen. His expression here is the only time we see his true self. It's not triumph, it's a weary acceptance of what he has to do next. He turns his back, not because he's finished, but because he knows they can no longer move. A shadow moves in the corner of the frame. The real threat wasn't the men in front of him, but the one who sent them. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe just to survive the next 10 seconds. The detail most people miss. His hand never moved from the hilt. He's not looking at the enemy anymore, he's looking at the exit. But the exit is no longer where it used to be. A single word is spoken that changes the context of the entire encounter. Everything he thought he knew about this mission was a lie. Tension, compression, impact. He reaches for the object, but his fingers stop inches away. Something is wrong with the air. If you caught the setup from 10 pages ago, you know exactly why he's looking at the ceiling now. The floor beneath him isn't solid. It never was. He realizes it too late. The trap wasn't for them, it was for him. The final reveal isn't a person. but a realization that makes his previous victory feel like a catastrophic failure. He didn't just give an order. He redefined the hierarchy of the room with a single word. The weight of that command isn't in the volume, but in the absolute expectation of obedience. Watch the eyes of those around him, the flicker of uncertainty that proves no one expected this level of dominance. They thought they knew his limits, and in this moment, they realized they were measuring a shadow. The silence that follows is a weapon, a vacuum where their confidence used to be. Every second he doesn't speak is a second they spend doubting their own strength. Look closely at the way he carries himself, relaxed yet predatory, a man who knows the outcome before the conflict even begins. This isn't arrogance, it's a calculated psychological siege. Tension is thick enough to choke on, yet he seems to breathe it in like oxygen. You can see the shift in the air as the power dynamic recalibrates around his presence. One of them is already breaking, the sweat on his brow a silent admission that the battle of wills is already over. It only took one word to make them realize they are outclassed. He isn't just looking at them, he's dissecting their fear, finding the exact point where their resolve will snap. This is the detail most people miss. He's not fighting their bodies, he's dismantling their minds. Notice the subtle movement of his hand, a gesture so small it's almost invisible, yet it signals the start of the next phase. He's playing a game they haven't even realized has started. The environment itself seems to shrink, centering entirely on the friction between his will and their resistance. The walls are closing in, and he's the only one who isn't suffocating. This is the panel that broke the fandom when it first released, capturing the raw intensity of a man who has ceased to care about the rules. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated consequence. He speaks again, but the words matter less than the tone, a cold, clinical edge that leaves no room for negotiation. You're watching a man convince himself that he's already won, and the terrifying part is that he's right. The response from the others is hesitant, a staggered attempt to regain ground that has already been lost. They are reacting to a reality he created minutes ago. Pay attention to this frame, because you will not see this expression of absolute clarity from him again. Everything that follows stems from the decision he's making right here, in total silence. The internal monologue isn't necessary when the intent is written in the steel of his gaze. He's looking past the current threat to the inevitable conclusion. There's a shift in the pacing now, a slow burn realization that the exit has been blocked since the moment he walked in. The trap wasn't a physical one, it was their own hubris. He moves, and the motion is so fluid it feels like a violation of the stillness that preceded it. The violence isn't the point, the inevitability of it is. If you've been paying attention since the start, you can feel the weight of every choice leading to this specific, narrow point of no return. This is where the mask slips, just for a second. The scale of the confrontation is expanding, but the focus remains on the microscopic details of his control. He isn't reacting, he is dictating the rhythm of the entire room. Observe the background characters. Their fear is the mirror he uses to see his own reflection. They are the metric by which he measures his own descent into what he needs to become. He's not just winning, he's demonstrating the futility of their existence in his current path. It's a cold, hard lesson in the hierarchy of power. The lighting shifts, casting shadows that seem to extend from him like physical manifestations of his will. The visual storytelling here is doing the work that words simply can't. They take the bait, and the look on his face in this panel tells you everything you need to know about the tragedy that's about to unfold. He almost looks bored by their predictability. The impact is sudden, a sharp rupture in the tension that has been building for pages. It's not the climax, but the signal that the real descent has begun. He's already thinking 3 steps ahead, dismissing the current chaos as a solved problem. His eyes are searching for the next shadow, the one that actually poses a threat. You see the shift in his posture, the tension leaving his shoulders not because the danger is gone, but because he has fully accepted the role he has to play. The transformation is complete. The debris of the encounter is scattered, but his focus remains singular and sharp. He isn't looking at what he's destroyed, he's looking at what remains to be built. There's a secret being kept in this panel, hidden in the way he avoids looking at the one person who might understand him. The distance between them is a choice, not an accident. Only readers who caught the setup several pages ago understand why he's looking at the clock right now. The time isn't just a measurement. It's a deadline he hasn't shared with anyone else. He walks away, and the way the others watch him go tells you that the power balance has been permanently altered. He didn't just win a fight, he colonized their fear. The scene transitions, but the psychological residue of his presence lingers on the page. The next location feels colder, as if his influence preceded him. He's entering a new space now, and the contrast between his inner turmoil and his outward calm is starting to fray at the edges. You can see the effort it takes to remain this hollow. A new player enters, but the dynamic is already skewed. He's treating this interaction like a chess match where he's already seen the checkmate. Notice the way he listens, not for information, but for the lies they tell themselves. He's collecting vulnerabilities like trophies. The dialogue is a smoke screen, a series of diversions intended to keep the true objective hidden until it's too late to stop. He's masterfully manipulating the flow of information. There's a flash of something in his eyes, remorse, or perhaps just the exhaustion of having to maintain the facade for so long. He makes a move that seems counterintuitive, a risk that threatens to upend everything he's built. But look at his hands, they aren't shaking. The consequences of that choice ripple through the panels, creating a sense of impending disaster that only he seems to welcome. He's inviting the chaos. This is where the narrative starts to compress, the sentences getting shorter as the stakes become more personal. He's no longer just a player, he's the architect of his own downfall. He's face to face with a truth he's been avoiding, and the visual layout of this page emphasizes his isolation. He's trapped in a cage of his own making. The reveal is subtle, a detail in the background that recontextualizes everything he said for the last 10 pages. If you missed it, go back and look at his shadow. He doesn't react to the revelation, which is the most terrifying reaction of all. He knew, he's always known. The pacing accelerates, the panels becoming jagged and frantic as the control he fought so hard for begins to slip through his fingers. He's losing the grip, and he's enjoying it. Every word now feels like a finality, a nail being driven into the coffin of the person he used to be. There is no going back after this. He stands on the precipice, and the look he gives the reader is a challenge. He's asking if you have the stomach to follow him where he's going next. The final panels of this sequence are a masterclass in tension, holding the breath of the narrative until it hurts. He's waiting for the first domino to fall. It falls, and as the screen fades to black, you realize that the person who just walked out of that room isn't the one who walked in. He woke up screaming for a reflection. Most people fear what's in the dark, but he's terrified of what's staring back in the light. There is a mirror. It's waiting for him. He moves with a desperation that suggests he isn't looking for himself, but for proof that he still exists. His hands find the glass first, cold, solid, unforgiving. One word escapes him, and it isn't a name. It's a realization of a nightmare he hasn't fully processed yet. You're watching a man look at a face he doesn't recognize. The disconnect is physical, a visceral rejection of his own skin. He traces the jawline, searching for a scar or a flaw that belongs to the man he used to be. There's nothing. The silence in the room is heavy. It's the sound of an identity dissolving in real time. Notice his eyes. They aren't looking at the reflection, they are looking through it, searching for the glitch in the reality he's been forced into. This is the moment the community has been dissecting since the chapter dropped. The subtle shift in his expression suggests he's found something he shouldn't have. He isn't just shocked anymore, he's calculating. The panic has been replaced by a cold, sharp survival instinct. Pay attention to the way he pulls away. He's realized that the mirror isn't showing him a stranger, it's showing him a weapon. If you've been following the subtext, you already know why this specific face is a death sentence. He's standing in a room that doesn't belong to him, wearing a life he didn't earn. The weight of the deception is already starting to crush him. Every movement is stiff, choreographed by a mind trying to play a role it hasn't learned the lines for yet. He finds a small detail, a mark, a ring, a letter, that changes the context of his arrival. The stakes just tripled. He's not the only one in this house. The realization hits him not through sound, but through the sudden, suffocating change in the air. The door handle turns, slowly, methodically. Whoever is on the other side knows exactly who is supposed to be in this room. He has 3 seconds to decide who he's going to be. The man he was is dead. The man he is now is a ghost. He settles into a posture of absolute confidence. It's a lie, but it's a perfect one. The person entering doesn't see the panic. They see exactly what they expect to see, which is the most dangerous outcome possible. You're seeing the birth of a predator. He's no longer the victim of this world. He's starting to see the cracks in its foundation. A single sentence is spoken by the visitor. It's a test, a trap laid with the casual grace of someone who has done this before. He responds. His voice is different. It's lower, steadier, a sound he didn't know he was capable of making. The visitor pauses. That 1-second hesitation is the only reward you get for paying attention to his hands. The game has officially begun. No more questions. Only moves and countermoves in a room that has become a chessboard. He smiles. It's the kind of smile that makes you realize everything he said before was a calculated distraction. The mirror doesn't lie, but your eyes just did. You're looking at a man who just realized his reality has a leak in it. He insists there were snakes, but the room is empty. Pay attention to the way he avoids his own reflection. He's not afraid of what's in the room, he's afraid of what's in his skin. She's watching him with a look that isn't concern, it's observation. You've seen this before. The moment a witness becomes a judge. He's clawing at his wrist as if something is burrowing underneath the flesh. If you look closely at the line work, the trauma isn't on the surface. It's an internal collapse. The scream isn't for help. It's the sound of someone realizing they are the only ones hearing the noise. Were other people unable to see it? That's the question that shifts this from a horror story to a conspiracy of the mind. Silence is the loudest thing in this panel. He's waiting for a contradiction that never comes, and that's where the real panic starts to settle. Notice the framing here? He's small, cornered by the very architecture of his own home. The environment is beginning to feel like a predator. He's checking his wrist again. The marks are gone, but the memory of the pain is more real than the skin itself. You can see him trying to rationalize the irrational. It's a classic psychological trap. The more you try to find a logical explanation, the deeper you bury the truth. This is the detail most people miss. His hand never actually stopped shaking. Even when he speaks calmly, his body is still screaming. A shadow moves in the background, but he doesn't turn. You're seeing the threat before he does, and that gap is where the dread lives. He's making a choice now, to trust his senses or his sanity. It's a binary choice with no safe exit. The dialogue is a mask. He's saying he's fine, but the way he grips the table tells a completely different story. Look at her eyes in this frame. She knows something he doesn't, and she's waiting for him to figure it out on his own. The pacing slows down here. Every movement feels heavy, like he's walking through water. He finds a mark, just a small one, but it's enough to prove that he isn't crazy, which is actually much worse. The realization hits. If the snakes were real, then everything else he's been told is a lie. This is the panel that broke the fandom. The subtle shift in the background art suggests that the room isn't a room at all. He stopped breathing. Not because he's scared, but because he's listening to something moving inside the walls. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe. It's a masterclass in self-deception. The tension here is a wire pulled too tight. One more word and it snaps. He reaches for the door. The handle is cold, but his hand is burning. The physical world is losing its consistency. There's a reflection in the glass that doesn't match his movement. Only readers who caught the setup earlier understand what just happened. He sees it, just for a second, the flicker of something that shouldn't exist in a world governed by logic. The escalation is no longer subtle. The walls are closing in, literally or metaphorically. It doesn't matter anymore. He's running now, but you can't run from a haunting that's happening inside your own nervous system. Every shadow is a teeth-filled mouth. The visual language here is becoming increasingly fragmented, mirroring his mental state. He stops. He's found something. A piece of evidence that reframes every single interaction he's had in this chapter. The look on his face isn't terror anymore. It's a cold, hard clarity. He turns back toward the person he trusted most. The betrayal hasn't happened yet, but the foundation is already gone. Pay attention to this panel. You will not see this expression of innocence on him again. The air in the room has changed. You can almost feel the drop in temperature through the screen. He asks the one question he shouldn't have. The answer is written on her face before she even opens her mouth. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this silence means. He moves, she doesn't mistake. The floor gives way, not under his feet, but under his understanding of who he is. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward. The truth isn't out there, it's already inside. He looks into the mirror one last time. The person looking back isn't the person who started this chapter. He reaches out to touch the glass, but his hand doesn't stop at the surface. The air is heavy with the stench of failure. He has 1 second to realize everything is falling apart. That single word, damn it, is the sound of a carefully constructed plan shattering in real time. They scream his name as if it were a prayer. Legion, it's not a call for help. It's a desperate attempt to tether a man who is already slipping away from reality. Repetition is the first sign of a mind breaking under pressure. Notice how the name loses its meaning with every shout. Legion is no longer a person. He is a symbol of a catastrophe they cannot contain. Look closely at the way the shadow falls across the frame. Most viewers see a struggle, but you can see the calculation in his eyes. He isn't fighting to survive. He's waiting for the exact moment to let go. Silence follows the screaming, and it is far more dangerous. The landscape itself seems to hold its breath. This is the detail most people miss. The environment isn't reacting to him, he is reshaping the environment. Gravity begins to feel optional. The physics of the scene are warping around his intent. If you've been watching closely, you know this isn't a power-up. It's a structural failure of his own humanity. He moves with a fluidity that suggests he has done this 1,000 times in his head. The friction between who he was and what he is becoming is the real source of the heat on this page. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe. The grip on his weapon is too tight, a physical manifestation of a lie he's telling his own soul. The perspective shifts, making the scale of the threat finally clear. It's not a monster or an enemy. It's the weight of the expectations he never asked for and can no longer carry. Pay attention to this panel. You will not see this expression of pure, unadulterated clarity again. This is the identity lock, the moment where the protagonist stops being the hero and starts being the consequence. A subtle shift in the background art signals the emergence of a hidden motive. He isn't aiming for the target everyone expects. He's looking past the conflict toward a goal only he understands. This is the panel that broke the fandom when it first dropped. It recontextualizes every sacrifice made in the previous chapters as a calculated deposit into a very dark bank account. The dialogue is sparse because words are now useless. Every strike is a sentence. Every parry is a rebuttal. The conversation is happening at the speed of steel. Notice the blood, not where it's landing, but where it is. He is controlling the space with a precision that borders on the divine or perhaps the demonic. Minor detail from 10 pages ago just detonated. The slight tremor in his hand wasn't fatigue. It was the first crack in the seal he placed on his own power. The pacing accelerates. The panels tighten. The sequence is designed to make your heart rate mimic the rhythm of the battle. Breath is a luxury he can no longer afford. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened here. The betrayal isn't coming from the enemy. It's coming from the very foundation of his abilities. He smiles, and it's the most terrifying thing in the chapter. It's the smile of someone who has finally stopped caring about the cost of victory. The escalation hits a vertical wall. He isn't just winning, he is erasing the possibility of a counterattack. It's a psychological execution disguised as a combat maneuver. Everything before this was set up. This is what the chapter was building toward. The revelation isn't a secret being told, but a truth being felt. Short, sharp, impact. The world narrows down to a single point of contact. The irony is that he's doing exactly what they told him never to do. He looks back, and for a split second, you see the person he used to be. That flicker of hesitation is the most dangerous thing in the room. The consequences are already larger than anyone admits. The damage isn't just physical, it's narrative. The story can never go back to being what it was before this moment. High psychological weight, minimal movement. He's standing still, but the tension is vibrating off the page. This is the calm before the final fracture. You feel the shift in the air. The superiority framing here is vital. You see the trap he's walking into, and you realize he sees it too, and he's walking into it anyway. The plan complicates. A new variable enters the frame, rendering his previous calculations obsolete. Friction, irony, risk. The lines are thinner now. The art reflects the fragility of the situation. One wrong move, and the entire arc collapses into tragedy. He makes the choice. It's the wrong one for his survival, but the only one for his objective. The tragedy is that he knows the difference. The final breath. The weapon is mid-swing. The eyes are closed. The scream from the beginning of the chapter returns, but this time it's silent. The visual field blurs. Is it exhaustion or the world itself giving way? The answer lies in the detail of the very last panel, which reframes everything you just saw. He didn't expect the vibration in his pocket to feel like a death sentence. Most people see a notification. He sees a breach in a perimeter he spent 20 years reinforcing. The world is obsessed with the ghost of Legion, chasing conspiracy theories like starving hounds. They want a hero returned, but they haven't considered the cost of what that return actually signifies. An unknown number is never just a wrong digit in this world. It's a probe, a calculated test of his anonymity that suggests the walls are finally starting to bleed. Notice how his grip tightens just a fraction of an inch. He's not afraid of the caller. He's afraid of the version of himself that might have to answer. The silence between the rings is where the real interrogation happens. Every second he doesn't pick up, he's negotiating with a past that refuses to stay buried. He looks at the screen not as a device, but as a mirror reflecting a reflection. You can see the moment he stops being a bystander and starts calculating the trajectory of the coming storm. There is a specific kind of stillness that precedes a total collapse of order. He's wearing it now, a mask of calm that hides a mind already 3 moves ahead of an enemy he hasn't even named yet. Look closely at the background details most readers ignore. The environment isn't just a setting, it's a cage that's getting smaller with every passing second. He finally touches the device, and for a heartbeat, the power dynamic shifts. He isn't the one being hunted, he's the one deciding whether or not to let the hunt begin. The connection is made, but the words aren't the point. It's the frequency of the breath on the other end, a signature he recognizes from a life he tried to delete. If you've been paying attention to the way he carries his weight, you already know he's injured. Not physically, but fundamentally, in a way that makes every decision a calculated risk. This is the moment that usually breaks the fandom, because he chooses the one path no one predicted. He doesn't run, he invites the chaos in. His eyes aren't tracking the movement in the room, they're tracking the implications of what was just said. The betrayal isn't coming, it's already happened. Short breaths, controlled movements. He is a man performing a role for an audience of ghosts, hoping one of them finally blinks. Pay attention to this panel, because you will never see him this vulnerable again. He's realizing that the conspiracy theories weren't just noise, they were the blueprint for his own execution. The shadow stretching across the floor isn't his. Only those who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand the weight of this arrival. Gravity seems to double in this room. He's standing still, yet everything about his posture suggests a man preparing to jump into an abyss. He says nothing, which is his most dangerous weapon. You're watching a man convince himself of a lie so he can survive the truth. The detail most people miss is his hand. It hasn't moved an inch, yet the entire atmosphere of the scene has shifted from defensive to predatory. Everything before this was just set up. This is the moment the narrative architecture reveals its true shape, and it's a trap he built for himself. The screen goes black, but the reflection remains. He is staring at the one person he can't outrun, and for the first time, he doesn't look away. A single word is whispered, and it reframes every interaction from the first page. It wasn't a call for help, it was a countdown. He turns toward the door, and the light hits him in a way that makes him look like a stranger. The man we started this chapter with is gone. He steps into the hallway, knowing that what waits for him there is the only thing worse than being forgot. He has 1 second, and somehow he uses it to change everything. This isn't just a phone call from the Prime Minister, it's the moment the leash snaps. Notice how Hugo doesn't flinch, because for a man like him, a leader's summons is just another variable to be manipulated. The screen flickers with a number that should command respect, but here, it looks like a countdown. You're watching the exact moment a professional realizes the hierarchy they've served is starting to crumble. Silence is the real threat in this room. While others scramble for words, Jin lets the weight of the situation do the talking for him. It's a classic power move. Let the opponent fill the void with their own anxiety. Pay attention to this panel. You will not see this expression again. It's the flicker of a man realizing he's no longer the hunter, but the one being observed under a microscope. The setting is clinical, cold, and entirely deceptive. They want him to feel safe, but the architecture itself is designed to make him feel small. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this means. He isn't just listening. He's calculating the cost of every word spoken. The detail most people miss is how his hand never moves, a stillness that signals absolute readiness for the violence he knows is coming. There's a hidden motive here that goes beyond simple politics. He's looking for a specific reaction, a crack in the armor that hasn't appeared yet. The stakes aren't just his career, they're the lives of everyone currently in that room. Notice what he's actually calculating here. It's not a defense, it's an invitation. He's leading them into a narrative trap they're all too eager to walk into. The tension shifts from the verbal to the physical. You've seen this pattern before, but he hasn't, which gives you the edge in predicting the disaster about to unfold. A minor detail is seated here in the background, a shadow that shouldn't be there. It's a detail that will detonate in 10 minutes, but for now, it's just a ghost in the machine. The plan complicates. A third party enters the frame, and the look on Jin's face tells you this wasn't in his original script. Friction is the only thing that's guaranteed now. Short, sharp movements. He's no longer waiting. The time for diplomacy ended the moment that door opened. This is the panel that broke the fandom. Everything we thought we knew about his loyalty is rewritten in a single, devastating glance. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe. It's a psychological suicide mission. The consequences are already larger than anyone admits. He moved, they didn't, mistake. The distance between them just became a kill zone. The air in the room has changed. It's heavy, thick with the realization that there is no exit strategy left. Every line here feels like the last breath before impact. He doesn't say a word, but the way he stands tells the whole story. He's finished playing the part they assigned him. This is the real Jin. A revealed detail reframes everything before it. He wasn't the target, he was the bait. And now, the real predator has arrived. The screen goes dark, but the questions are just beginning. What happens next is the reason this chapter exists. Everything before this was just the setup for the coming storm. He stepped into the light of a world that had already mourned him. The air felt different, thinner, colder, as if reality itself hadn't prepared for his return. 20 years of silence broken by a single, deliberate footfall. You can see it in the way he scans the horizon. He isn't looking for a home, he's identifying targets. The ruins of the past are just obstacles in a game he's already won once. Every breath is a calculated reclamation of what they stole. The city hasn't just changed, it has become a monument to his absence. Massive structures pierce the sky, built on the assumption that the disaster-class hero was a myth buried in the rubble. They forgot that myths don't stay dead. He stops at a reflection, barely recognizing the face staring back. The eyes are the same, sharp, predatory, and weary of a betrayal that still stings like a fresh wound. He touches the glass, and for a second, the image ripples as if the world is flinching. Notice the subtle shift in his posture as he hears the first signs of life. Most would feel relief, but he only feels the weight of 1,000 eyes that haven't earned the right to look at him. This isn't a reunion, it's a scouting mission. The technology around him is alien, sleek, and fragile. It's a civilization built on the bones of his era, yet it looks so effortlessly breakable. He moves through the crowd like a ghost through a graveyard, unseen, but felt in the sudden drop in temperature. The screen flickers with news of the 12 Zodiacs, the heroes who supposedly saved the world. You've seen this pattern before, the victors rewriting history to hide the blood on their hands. He stares at their faces, and his silence is a death sentence. The memories of the Great Abyss don't just fade, they pulse. Every scar on his body has a name, and every name belongs to someone currently celebrating their heroism in a skyscraper. He isn't angry, he's patient. A group of low-level hunters struts through the plaza, their gear shiny and unused. They talk about disasters as if they understand the word. They don't realize they're standing in the shadow of the only disaster that ever mattered. He catches a glimpse of a memorial statue in the distance. It's supposed to be him, but the features are softened, the edge taken off to make him a noble sacrifice. It's a lie cast in bronze, and he has half a mind to melt it down. Someone bumps into him, a frantic office worker who doesn't even look up. The audacity of being ordinary in a world he bled for is the greatest insult of all. He lets them pass, but his fingers twitch with the muscle memory of 100 battles. The architectural layout of the new Seoul is a grid of surveillance and control. Every corner has a camera, every citizen has a tracker. He realizes the peace, they built is just a prettier version of the cage he just escaped. He finds a small, tucked-away shop that looks like it survived the cataclysm. It smells of old paper and ozone. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this means. He's looking for a tether to the world that was. The shopkeeper looks at him with a glimmer of recognition that quickly turns to fear. People don't look like this anymore, scarred, raw, and radiating a physical pressure that makes the air heavy. He asks a single question, and the man's hands start to shake. Information is the only currency that hasn't changed. He learns that the saints are now gods, and the hero is a dirty word whispered in back alleys. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was a systematic erasure of his soul. He steps back into the street, and the neon lights seem to bleed into the pavement. The scale of the deception is breathtaking. They didn't just leave him to die, they used his death to fund their ascension. Pay attention to this panel, the way he ignores the massive monster alert blaring from the towers. To everyone else, it's a crisis. To him, it's a distraction. He's looking for the architect of the alarm, not the beast itself. A monster emerges from a rift, a creature that would have been a mid-tier threat in his day. The current hunters scramble like ants, their formations messy and their fear palpable. He watches from the sidelines, a critic at a bad play. One hunter is cornered, her weapon broken, her eyes wide with the realization that the propaganda didn't prepare her for this. He doesn't move. You're watching a man convince himself that he owes this world nothing. The beast lunges, and in a blur that the high-speed cameras can't even track, the threat is simply gone. No explosion, no grand speech, just a surgical removal of life. He stands over the corpse, and the silence is deafening. The girl looks up at him, not with gratitude, but with a terror that exceeds her fear of the monster. This is the panel that broke the fandom, the moment the world realizes that a god has returned, and he isn't here to save them. He doesn't offer a hand to help her up. Instead, he looks at her broken gear, a brand name belonging to one of his old companions. The realization that his friends turned his legacy into a corporate brand is the final spark. He disappears before the authorities can arrive. He doesn't want to be a hero, he wants to be a reckoning. The footprints he leaves in the asphalt are deep, cracked, and glowing with a residual energy that shouldn't exist. High above, in a room of glass and gold, a man stops mid-sentence. He feels a vibration in his soul that he hasn't felt in 2 decades. The color drains from his face because he knows that if he is back, no wall is thick enough. The news reports are already calling it a miracle intervention, trying to spin the unknown savior into a new marketing campaign. They are desperately trying to categorize a force that refuses to be contained. He finds an old hideout, a basement beneath a ruined temple. It's the only place the saints forgot to pave over. Here, the air is thick with the scent of dried blood and old promises. He reaches into a hidden cache and pulls out a weapon that looks like it was forged in the heart of a dying star. It doesn't hum, it screams. This is the detail most people miss. The weapon isn't reacting to him, it's screaming in fear of him. He begins to sharpen the blade, the sound a rhythmic, metallic screech that echoes through the empty temple. Every stroke is a name. Every spark is a memory of the moment the blade was driven into his back. You can see the madness creeping into the corners of his eyes. It's not a chaotic insanity, but a cold, focused obsession. He isn't reclaiming his life, he's preparing a funeral for the world that replaced him. A holographic map flickers to life, showing the locations of the 12 saints. They are spread out, insulated by armies and fans. He studies the map like a butcher studies a carcass, looking for the first cut. The first target is the one who was closest to him, the one who held his hand while the other 11 plunged their swords in. The irony isn't lost on him, he'll start with the heart of the group. He steps out of the basement, and for the first time, he isn't hiding his presence. The ground ripples beneath his feet. The sky darkens as if the atmosphere itself is trying to hide from what's coming. A high-ranking hunter blocks his path, sensing the anomaly. He's one of the new generation, arrogant and draped in legendary gear. He starts a speech about jurisdiction, and he doesn't realize he's already dead. The fight isn't a fight, it's a lesson in physics. The hunter's invincible shield shatters like cheap glass at the mere suggestion of a strike. He doesn't even use his weapon. He uses the man's own momentum to bury him in the concrete. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened. He's using the very techniques the saints claim to have invented. He's showing the world that their gods are just thieves. He leaves the hunter alive but broken. "Tell them," he whispers, and the sound is like grinding stones. "Tell them the disaster has finished his vacation." The city's power grid begins to fail as he moves toward the central district. Lights flicker and die in his wake. He is a black hole moving through a world of neon, consuming the light they didn't earn. He stands at the base of the Great Tower, a spire that represents the absolute peak of the New World Order. Thousands of people are inside, celebrating an anniversary of the Great Victory. He looks up, and a predatory grin finally touches his lips. Security droids descend like a swarm of hornets. They are state-of-the-art, designed to take down S-Rank threats. He walks through them, his hands in his pockets, and they simply fall apart as he passes, as if their programming refused to acknowledge his existence. Inside the tower, the alarm isn't a siren, it's a silent panic. The elites are being ushered to bunkers, their expensive champagne forgotten on silk-covered tables. They know the ghost has arrived. He enters the main elevator. The music is soft, a jarring contrast to the carnage he left in the lobby. He looks at his reflection one last time and straightens his collar. If he's going to kill a god, he might as well look the part. The doors open to the penthouse. The air is floral and expensive. At the end of a long hall stands a figure shrouded in light, a woman whose face is plastered on every billboard in the country. She doesn't look like a traitor, she looks like an angel. She turns, and for a heartbeat, there is a flicker of the girl he used to protect. Then, it's gone, replaced by the cold, calculating mask of a saint. "You should have stayed in the hole, Gunwoo," she says, her voice like silk over a razor. He doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. He simply draws the black blade, and the penthouse windows shatter outward from the sheer pressure of his intent. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward. The blade doesn't just cut, it erases the space between them. She barely deflects it with a spear made of pure light, but the floor beneath her liquefies from the impact. The goddess is trembling. "You think you're the only one who got stronger?" she screams, her aura flaring until it blinds the cameras. But you can see what she can't. His shadow is growing, stretching out to swallow her light. He catches the tip of her spear with his bare hand. The light sears his flesh, but he doesn't blink. The pain is a reminder that he's still alive and that she is still capable of bleeding. He leans in close, his breath cold against her ear. "I didn't come back for an apology," he growls. The look on her face is the realization that he didn't come back for his life either. He throws her through 3 reinforced walls as if she were made of paper. The Saint of Compassion is coughing up blood on a pile of debris, her divinity leaking out like oil from a broken machine. He stands over her, the black blade pointed at her throat. The world is watching through the cracked remains of the surveillance drones. The narrative they spent 20 years building is dying in real time. He pauses. He hears something, not a person, but a sound from the sky. A golden light begins to pour through the shattered ceiling, far brighter than the woman beneath him. Another saint is descending, then another. The sky is filled with the 12, their collective power enough to level the continent. They aren't here to save her, they're here to bury the evidence. He looks up at the assembly of gods, his old friends who turned into monsters while he was gone. He isn't outnumbered. He's finally got them all in one place. The lead saint raises a hand, and the atmosphere begins to burn. "For the sake of the world," he proclaims, the same lie he told 20 years ago. The hypocrisy is so thick it's suffocating. Gunwoo lets out a short, dry laugh. He reaches for a seal on his own chest, a lock he placed on his own power to keep the abyss from consuming him. He begins to peel it back. As the seal breaks, the black blade turns into a liquid void, and the screen goes white with a sound that isn't a scream, but a roar of something that was never human to begin with. The question isn't whether he can survive them, it's whether there will be a world left if he wins. He walked away without looking back, a choice that seemed casual but carried the weight of a final departure. The younger one's voice tracks him, filled with a confusion that mirrors exactly what you're likely feeling right now. There is no destination in his stride, only the urgent need to outrun a silence that has become too loud to ignore. Fresh air is the lie we tell when the atmosphere inside has become toxic enough to kill. He isn't seeking oxygen. He's seeking a version of himself that hasn't been compromised by the expectations of the room he just left. Watch how he moves. Every step is a calculated distance between who he is and who they want him to be. The transition from the structured warmth of the interior to the cold, expansive isolation of the outdoors is where the mask starts to slip. Most viewers will focus on the scenery, but the real story is in the tension held in his shoulders, a physical manifestation of a secret he isn't ready to share. The sound of his footsteps against the earth provides a rhythmic grounding to a mind that is clearly beginning to spiral. You can almost feel the temperature drop, not because of the weather, but because of the chilling realization that he is now completely alone with his thoughts. He stops. The stillness is more aggressive than any movement could be, a vacuum that demands to be filled with the truth. If you've been paying attention to his eyes, you'll notice they aren't looking at the horizon, but at a memory that hasn't happened yet. This is the moment where the internal architecture of his resolve begins to show its first hairline fractures. He believes he is in control of this isolation, but the environment is starting to swallow him, turning a simple walk into a psychological trap. Notice the way the light hits his face here. It's the only time in this chapter we see him without the shadow of the Hyung persona. It's a brief, vulnerable glimpse into a man who has spent so long being a pillar for others that he's forgotten how to stand for himself. The silence of the woods isn't peaceful. It's expectant, waiting for him to make the mistake of speaking his true intent out loud. He's gambling with his own sanity here, testing the limits of how much weight a single mind can carry before it breaks. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe, and the tragedy is that he's almost succeeding. The detail most people miss is that his hand never moved from its pocket, gripping a reality he refuses to let go of. A shadow shifts in the periphery, a subtle reminder that even in our most private moments, we are being observed by the consequences of our past. He doesn't react, which is the most terrifying reaction possible. It means he was already expecting it. Pacing slows to a crawl, forcing you to sit in the discomfort of his hesitation. Every second he spends in this clearing is a second the world outside continues to move toward a catastrophe he thinks he can prevent. This is the panel that broke the fandom, not because of what happens, but because of what is finally admitted in the vacancy of his expression. The community has been arguing about this specific look since it dropped, debating if it's resignation or the birth of a new, darker ambition. He looks back toward the house, a thin line of smoke on the horizon representing the life he is systematically dismantling. It's a slow-burn betrayal of the self, and you're the only one who sees the match still burning in his mind. The stakes just shifted from a personal crisis to a structural collapse, yet his face remains a mask of porcelain indifference. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened in the tilt of his head. Friction begins to manifest in the very air around him, a physical pressure that signals the end of his quiet contemplation. The plan wasn't just to get air. It was to find the strength to do the one thing he promised he'd never do. Short breaths, sharp focus. The world is shrinking down to the space between his next 2 heartbeats. He hears it, you see it. The collision is inevitable now. He didn't move, they did mistake. Pay attention to this panel, because you will not see this expression of pure, unadulterated clarity again. It's the look of a man who has finally stopped running and realized that the monster he was fleeing has his own face. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward, the moment the fresh air turns into a vacuum. He reaches out, not to grab something, but to see if the world is still solid enough to resist him. It isn't. The revelation is quiet, a whisper in the back of his mind that suddenly becomes a roar. He isn't the victim of this story, he's the architect of the very cage he's trying to escape. And just when you think you understand this character, he does that. A gesture so small it almost goes unnoticed, but it reframes every word he's spoken since page 2. The tension is compressed into a single point of impact, a choice that cannot be unmade. He smiles. It's the wrong time to smile. That's the real threat. The ground beneath him seems to give way, not physically, but as a foundation of his moral reality. He is falling, and for the first time, he isn't trying to stop the descent. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this means for the brother left behind in the house. The distance between them isn't measured in miles anymore, but in the irreparable damage of this single hour. The question isn't whether he can go back. It's whether there's anything left to go back to. He turns his back on the light, embracing the deepening shadows of the forest with a familiarity that should haunt you. One last look, one last lie, one last breath. The screen of his phone lights up, a digital tether to a world he just set on fire. He doesn't answer. He doesn't even look at the name. The silence returns, but it's different now. It's heavy, pregnant with the weight of what happens when the fresh air finally runs out. He called them roaches, and for a split second, the air itself went still. It wasn't just an insult. It was a calculated provocation designed to strip away their composure before the first blow even landed. One man is already considering surrender, sensing the shift in the atmosphere that the others are too blinded by rage to notice. The word hangs there, poisonous and heavy. You can see the gears turning in their heads as they realize this isn't a standard confrontation. This is a predator identifying its prey, and the psychological weight of that realization is starting to sink in. Indignation is a dangerous emotion when you're outmatched. They demand a retraction, but they're asking a wolf to apologize for its teeth. Their pride is the only thing they have left, and it's about to become their greatest liability. He doesn't just confirm the slur. He leans into it with a casualness that is more terrifying than an outright scream. This is the moment where the power dynamic shifts irrevocably. If you've been watching closely, you'll see he isn't even looking at their weapons, he's looking at their throats. The movement is so fluid it feels like a glitch in reality. He isn't fighting them, he's dismantling them, one misguided assumption at a time. The speed is a message, a demonstration that their numbers mean nothing if they can't even track his shadow. Notice the way his weight shifts here. It's a detail most people miss, but it signals the end of the defensive phase. He stopped playing with his food, and the look in his eyes suggests he's found the specific weakness he was looking for. Gravity seems to work differently for him. While they are anchored by their fear and their heavy, clumsy movements, he is already 3 steps ahead of the physical plane. This is where the tactical superiority framing becomes undeniable. He's not just faster, he's smarter. Single strike, and the confidence of the group evaporates. The silence that follows is louder than the clash of steel. They are starting to understand that they aren't the protagonists of this encounter, they are the footnotes. He's looking at the leader now, and the expression is one of profound boredom. Nothing unnerves an opponent more than realizing their ultimate technique is viewed as a minor inconvenience. This is the psychological breaking point that the community has been arguing about since it dropped. The ground beneath them feels less stable. He hasn't moved an inch, yet they are the ones losing their balance. It's a masterclass in presence, the ability to dominate a space without uttering a single word. You're watching a man convince himself he still has a chance, even as his hands begin to shake. The desperation is palpable now, a frantic search for an opening that simply doesn't exist. He's already lost, he just hasn't felt the pain yet. The counterattack isn't a strike, it's a revelation. He uses their own momentum against them, a physical irony that rewards the viewer who saw the setup coming 5 pages ago. Every movement is a sentence in a declaration of absolute dominance. Blood hits the floor, and the reality of their situation finally registers. This isn't a duel, it's an execution. The transition from arrogance to pure, unadulterated terror is complete. He pauses, giving them a moment to feel the weight of their failure. It's a cruel kind of mercy, letting them stare into the abyss before he pushes them in. The tension here is a coiled spring, ready to snap at the slightest breath. Pay attention to this panel. You will not see this expression again. It's a flicker of something human, perhaps pity, or perhaps just a reminder of why he started this path in the first place. Then, it's gone, replaced by the mask of the monster. One man tries to run, but the exit might as well be on another planet. The realization that there is no escape is the final nail in the coffin of their morale. They are trapped in a room with the one person they should have never crossed. He speaks again, but it's not for their benefit. It's a reminder to himself of the stakes involved. The hidden motive starts to bleed through the surface. This wasn't just about roaches. It was about a debt that can only be paid in one currency. The escalation reaches its peak as he prepares the final sequence. The lines are shorter, the impacts heavier. There is no more room for dialogue, only the brutal efficiency of a man who has perfected the art of ending things. Every strike is a question they can't answer. Why did they think they were ready? Why did they ignore the warnings? The consequences are unfolding in real time, and they are devastating. He stands amidst the wreckage of their ambition. It's a quiet moment, but the psychological weight is staggering. He isn't even breathing hard, which is the most terrifying revelation of all. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what just happened in this specific movement. It's a callback to a technique that was dismissed as a fluke, now revealed as his signature. The loop is closing. He turns his gaze toward the shadows. Someone else is watching. The realization that this entire slaughter was just a performance for an unseen audience changes the context of every previous action. The intruder steps forward, and the air changes again. The previous fight was a warm-up. This is the real threat. The shift in his stance tells you everything you need to know about the power level of the newcomer. They exchange a look that carries more history than 1,000 pages of dialogue. This is the moment everything has been building toward, the intersection of two paths that were always meant to collide in blood. A single question is asked, but the answer is written in the bodies on the floor. The irony is sharp. They died for a cause that their superior is now abandoning without a second thought. The newcomer smiles, and it's the most unsettling thing in the entire chapter. It's a smile that knows the ending, a smile that has seen this play out 100 times before. You're witnessing the start of a much larger game. He doesn't flinch. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this means. He's no longer afraid of what comes next because he's already accepted the cost. The blade is drawn, but not for a strike. It's a gesture of invitation. He's inviting the chaos in, welcoming the very thing that will likely destroy him. The chapter ends not with a bang, but with a question that reframes the entire mission. As the dust settles and the two titans face off, the real question isn't who will win, but what will be left of the world once they're done. He didn't just survive, he dominated the space before anyone realized the rules had changed. Most observers are looking at the damage, but the real story is in the absolute lack of effort. If you've been watching him closely, you know this isn't his limit, it's his baseline. Imagine holding the power to end a life and choosing, instead, to make a statement with your bare hands. It's a specific kind of arrogance that requires total certainty. He didn't use his ability because they weren't worth the mana. This is where the calculation shifts from tactical to psychological. By mentioning what he could have done, he's not just bragging, he's mapping out the future. He wants them to feel the weight of the gap between his restraint and their survival. The realization hits the A-rank disciples like a physical blow. They weren't defeated by a superior power, but by a superior person. You can see the internal logic of their hierarchy shattering in real time. This is the moment they stop being warriors and start being witnesses. Notice the way the light shifts here. It's a classic cinematic cue for a shift in perspective. He's standing in the center of the debris, yet he's the only thing that looks untouched. The silence in this panel is louder than the fight that preceded it. Pay attention to the background characters. They are reacting to the myth, not the man. This is how a reputation is forged in a single afternoon. You're watching the exact second a protagonist becomes a legend in the eyes of his enemies. The tension doesn't dissipate, it just changes form. He's looking for something in the wreckage that has nothing to do with the disciples. There's a hidden objective here that most readers will overlook on the first pass. He moves with a predatory stillness that suggests he's already 3 steps ahead of the next conflict. It's not about the victory anymore. It's about the message he's sending to the people watching from the shadows. This is the panel that broke the fandom when it first leaked. The subtle twitch of his fingers suggests a boredom that is more terrifying than any display of rage. If you understand his true motivation, this boredom is a death sentence for someone in this room. Look at the framing of the doorway behind him. He's not leaving, he's inviting them to follow. It's a trap disguised as a departure. Only the viewers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand what he's actually fishing for. The internal monologue here is sparse because his actions are doing the heavy lifting. He doesn't need to explain his strength when the environment is still trembling from it. This is peak narrative compression, maximum impact with minimum noise. A new player enters the frame, and the atmosphere curdles instantly. The power dynamic hasn't just shifted, it has been completely rewritten. You're witnessing a collision of 2 different worlds, and only one can remain standing. Every line of dialogue is a weapon designed to probe for a weakness that doesn't exist. He's playing a game of mental chess while the other person is still trying to figure out the board. This isn't a conversation, it's an interrogation of the soul. The focus tightens on his eyes, and for a split second, you see the mask slip. There's a flicker of something older and darker than the current conflict. This is the detail most people miss. He's not just strong, he's haunted. The pace accelerates as the secondary characters begin to scramble for a defense. It's too late. The momentum he built in the first 10 pages is now an avalanche. Short, controlled, lethal. He isn't fighting anymore, he's cleaning up a mess. The efficiency of his movement is a psychological tactic designed to break their will before their bones. Notice the contrast between the chaos of the background and his absolute stillness. He is the eye of the storm. Everything revolves around his next decision, and he knows it. This is a moment of pure narrative irony. They think they've found a flaw. In reality, they've just walked into the exact position he needed them to be in. You can almost hear the click of the lock. The cost of his restraint is finally starting to show. Power this concentrated always leaves a mark on the user. He's pushing against a limit he hasn't admitted to anyone yet. The environment begins to reflect the internal state of the characters, shattered, cold, and irreversible. There is no going back to how things were before this page. The stakes have just become permanent. He turns his back, not out of trust, but out of total dismissal. It's the ultimate insult in a world built on pride. He's daring them to try something, knowing they are too paralyzed by fear to move. This is where the slow-burn psychological buildup pays off. He smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. It's a gesture meant to unsettle, a jagged piece of theater in a world of masks. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward. The reveal isn't what he says, but what he reveals about the world around him. He stops. He looks directly at the source of the new tension. And for the first time in this entire chapter, he looks interested. He hasn't changed. That realization is the first crack in the armor, a destabilizing truth that makes every strategy discussed before this moment irrelevant. The assumption was growth, but the reality is a terrifying, static persistence. Look at the way the light hits the blade. It's not a weapon, it's a statement of intent. Most viewers focus on the stance, but the real threat is the complete lack of hesitation in those eyes. Silence isn't just a lack of sound here. It's a tactical vacuum pulling the air out of the room. He's waiting for a mistake that hasn't happened yet, confident that it's inevitable. The distance between them is shrinking, yet the psychological gulf has never been wider. One side is playing a game of survival, while the other is merely conducting an experiment. Notice the subtle shift in his center of gravity. You've seen this pattern before in earlier encounters. He's baiting a reaction he already knows how to dismantle. The sweat on his brow isn't from exhaustion, but from the sudden, crushing realization that he's trapped in someone else's rhythm. This is the moment the hunter understands he's become the prey. He's calculating the cost of a single move, weighing his life against a pride he can no longer afford to keep. It's a transaction where both options lead to ruin. Every muscle is coiled, a spring under too much tension, waiting for a signal that may never come. The pacing here is deliberate. The author is forcing you to feel the weight of the pause. A flash of movement, but it's the shadow that tells the real story. He didn't miss. He repositioned the entire battlefield with a single step. There's a coldness in this expression that wasn't there 10 pages ago. The mask of humanity is slipping, revealing the mechanical precision underneath. Pay attention to the background details. The environment is being used as a secondary weapon. If you've been watching since the beginning, you already feel what this specific terrain shift means for the defense. It's a desperate gambit, a frantic reach for a weapon that isn't there. The irony of his situation is that his best asset has become his greatest liability. The impact isn't shown, only the aftermath in the debris and the dust. The weight of the blow is measured by what is no longer standing. He's smiling, but there's no warmth in it, only the satisfaction of a trap successfully sprung. This is the panel that broke the fandom, fueling months of debate over his true alignment. Look at the grip on the hilt. It's trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer physical strain of holding back a force that shouldn't exist. You're watching a man convince himself of a lie just to stay standing. The dialogue is a distraction. The real conversation is happening in the exchange of glances and the shifting of feet. He says he's finished, but his posture screams that he's just beginning. A sudden pivot changes the trajectory of the entire conflict. The detail most people miss. His hand never actually moved to strike. He let his opponent's momentum do the work. The atmosphere has shifted from a duel to an execution. The psychological weight per word in this sequence is designed to make you feel as breathless as the character on screen. He's looking past his enemy, toward a goal that hasn't been mentioned yet. The consequences of this fight are already larger than anyone in the room is willing to admit. Only readers who caught the setup 3 chapters ago understand the significance of this particular technique. It's not just a move, It's a callback to a failure he swore never to repeat. The blade is inches away, a razor-thin margin between existence and ending. The tension here is a physical thing, compressed into a single, silent frame. He's bleeding, but the wound is secondary to the loss of momentum. In this world, slowing down is the same as dying. Notice what he doesn't say in response to the provocation. That silence is the real threat, a void where his opponent expected to find a weakness. The world seems to slow down as the realization hits. They built their entire strategy around an assumption that was proven false 3 minutes ago. He moved, they didn't. Mistake. The simplicity of the failure is what makes it so devastating. A flicker of doubt crosses a face that was previously made of stone. This is the first time you've seen him truly uncertain, and it changes everything about the power dynamic. The ground gives way, a literal and metaphorical collapse of the foundation they were standing on. No one is safe anymore. He's reaching for something hidden in his cloak, a hidden motive finally emerging into the light. The stakes just doubled, and no one is prepared for the payout. Each breath is a struggle, a raspy testament to a body pushed beyond its limits. Yet the eyes remain focused, locked on a target that is already moving. The debris settles, revealing a landscape changed by the violence of the last few seconds. It's a graveyard of ambitions. He's standing in the center of the chaos, the only thing that remains unchanged. Everything before this was set up. This is what the entire arc was building toward. You're witnessing the birth of a new monster, or perhaps just the unveiling of the old one. The distinction doesn't matter when you're the one in its path. The final exchange is nearing, a collision of wills that can only have one survivor. The air is thick with the scent of ozone and desperation. He offers a hand, not in mercy, but in a calculated move to ensure total submission. The cruelty is in the choice he's forcing his opponent to make. A single drop of blood hits the floor, marking the end of the conversation and the beginning of the end. The perspective shifts, pulling you directly into the frame to see the world through his failing vision. You feel the tilt of the horizon, the loss of control. He's forgotten the original reason for the fight, lost in the pure, mechanical rhythm of the struggle. It's no longer about winning, it's about not being the first to break. The turn is coming. You can feel it in the way the panels are tightening, cutting off the exits. A revelation is whispered into the wind, a truth so sharp it cuts deeper than any blade. It reframes every action he's taken since the first page. He stops, the world stops with him. The silence is no longer a vacuum, it's a countdown. A hand reaches out from the shadows, a detail that changes the entire context of the surrounding characters. They weren't alone. They never were. The look of absolute horror on his face is the only confirmation you need. The plan didn't just fail, it was subverted from the very beginning. He looks directly into the camera, a final, chilling acknowledgement of the viewer's presence. As the screen fades, the question isn't whether he survived, but what he's become. He isn't just standing there. He's calculating the exact distance between who he was and the threshold he's about to cross. Most people would see a simple hesitation, but look closer at the way his shadow stretches toward the door. It's already claimed the space before he has. Silence is his favorite weapon, and right now, he's using it to suffocate the expectation of a normal greeting. When he claims he's just sleepy, it isn't exhaustion. It's a dismissal of the reality everyone else is forced to live in. The accusation of mooching is a shallow attempt to ground a situation that is rapidly spiraling out of her control. She thinks she's setting boundaries, but you can see it in his eyes. He doesn't view this as her house anymore, but as his first base of operations. Notice the subtle shift in his posture as he enters. The hunter has finally decided the trap is safe enough to step into. He isn't a guest, and if you've been paying attention to his hands, you know he's already looking for the structural weaknesses of this sanctuary. The domesticity of the scene is a lie designed to lower your guard just as much as hers. Every mundane movement here is a layer of camouflage for a motive that hasn't even begun to reveal its teeth. She's talking about the future as if it's something they'll share, oblivious to the fact that he's already partitioned his life away from her. The cruelty isn't in his words, but in the way he lets her believe her own lies. This is where the mask slips, just for a millisecond, for those of you who caught the micro-expression in the third panel. He isn't looking at her. He's looking through her at a ghost only he can see. The tension here isn't about what is being said, but about the heavy, electric air between their unspoken truths. You're watching a man convince himself of something he doesn't believe, and the cracks are starting to show. He moves with a precision that feels scripted, as if he's rehearsed this exact moment of vulnerability 1,000 times in his head. It's a performance, and she is the only audience member who doesn't know she's at a play. Pay attention to the background details in this frame. The framing of the window suggests a cage more than a view. He's trapped her in a conversation she thinks she's leading, a classic tactic of a mind that's always 3 steps ahead. A sudden change in tone, the short, clipped responses are designed to provoke a reaction he can later use against her. Friction isn't an accident here, it's a tool for extraction. If you've been following since the beginning, you already feel what this shift in lighting signifies. The shadows are no longer being cast by the room, they're being cast by his intent. She makes a mistake here, a small one, a single question that crosses a line he hadn't even drawn yet. The atmosphere doesn't just cool, it freezes solid. This is the panel that broke the fandom when it first dropped, and for good reason. Look at the way he handles the glass. It's a display of controlled violence that he's masquerading as simple thirst. The dialogue is a distraction. The real story is told in the distance he maintains even while standing inches away. He is a master of being present without being accessible. You've seen this pattern before, the slow withdrawal before the strike. He's feeding her just enough information to keep her curious, but not enough to keep her safe. The stakes just shifted. It's no longer about a place to sleep. It's about the information she's inadvertently holding over him like a blade. His internal monologue is a battlefield where logic is currently losing to a much darker impulse. The detail most people miss is how his hand never actually leaves his pocket. Everything she says now is being filed away, categorized by how it can be used to dismantle her resolve later. It's a psychological autopsy performed on a living subject. The irony of her smile in this panel is almost physical. She thinks she's won a small concession, but he's actually just widened the trap to make her more comfortable. The pacing slows down here, forcing you to sit in the discomfort of his prolonged stare. It's not affection, it's an assessment of value. He finally speaks a truth, but he wraps it in so many layers of sarcasm that she discards the only warning she'll ever get. You're watching the exact moment her intuition is overruled by her hope. Notice the reflection in the mirror behind him. It shows a man who isn't even pretending to be the person she's talking to. This is the duality that will eventually destroy this room. A sudden movement breaks the psychological stalemate, but it's not the release of tension you were expecting. It's a pivot into a much more dangerous territory. Only readers who caught the setup 10 pages ago understand what just happened with that discarded item. It wasn't an accident, it was a marker. The air in the room has changed, becoming heavy with the weight of what he's about to demand. He stopped playing the guest and started acting like the owner. She's finally starting to feel the chill, the slow realization that the person in front of her is a stranger wearing a familiar face. But it's too late to lock the doors now. He leans in, and for a second, the narration stops because the visual threat is so absolute it needs no translation. This is the peak of his manipulation, where he makes her feel like his victimhood is her responsibility. The finality of his posture suggests a closing of a chapter, but for him, the real game is only just beginning. He's cleared the first hurdle of her suspicion. Everything before this was set up. This is what it was building toward, the moment he stops pretending he needs her help. Look at the way the paneling tightens around them, mirroring the psychological trap he successfully sprung. There is no exit strategy for her anymore. He says her name, and it sounds like a sentence rather than a call. The power dynamic hasn't just shifted, it has been completely inverted. This is the silence that confirms your worst fears about his true nature. He isn't waiting for an answer. He's waiting for her to realize he doesn't need one. The way he turns away is the ultimate insult. It signals that she is no longer a threat worth monitoring. He has moved on to the next phase of a plan we haven't even seen the edges of yet. One last look back, and the expression he wears isn't one of triumph, but of a cold, clinical boredom. The hunt was too easy. As the light fades in the final panels, a single detail is revealed on the table that reframes every conversation they just had. You realize then that he wasn't looking for a home, he was looking for a witness,